Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Lazou. Lazou is a trilingual music artist, writer, producer, and award nominated podcaster who grew up in the only place the dodo bird has ever lived, Mauritius. She's fluent in English, French, and Mauritian Creole, Mauritian. How are you today, Lazou? Thanks for being here.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you about your languages and your culture, and we can get to talking. So I know this is going to be a fun conversation. I like to start each episode with the same question, which is what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
I don't know which is my first language. I feel like I either don't have one or have two, or I'm not sure. Started with English and Creole at the same time, and also a little bit of French. And then when
Okay.
I went to school, I was taught both French and English in school. I've also learned a little bit of Chinese Hakka, but I would not say I'm fluent. So
What about the languages that you spoke at home? What languages did you hear spoken at home when you were growing up?
Mauritian Creole and Hakka, I think those were the two.
How were they used? Were there certain languages or certain expressions that you would use with certain members of your family and maybe certain ones with others?
So it was predominantly Creole, but the older generation, so my grandmother, my great grandmother on my mom's side, and then my grandmother on my dad's side would speak Hakka, and that was their first or second language.
Mhm.
Um, so when my mother was talking to her mother, it would be a mix of Creole and Hakka.
Okay.
And then, because you're around people speaking Hakka and Creole all the time, you kind of pick up some words. So I would know a few things, like when my grandmother would say, come eat, sometimes she would say it in Hakka, try to teach us some Hakka. But otherwise, it was mostly Creole.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like you were encouraged or discouraged to communicate in Hakka by your grandparents, let's say?
It was I was encouraged a little bit, but I think they preemptively gave up because
Mhm.
everybody just spoke Creole. So they would try to teach us a few words, sometimes they would tell us things in Hakka and then translate it in Creole. But I think they do want the newer generation to speak Hakka. But of course, when you're a kid, the old people language does not sound very interesting to you.
Right. Right. And that's why I was asking because I don't have that experience of the intergenerational, heritage language and having something that's even given the option to be passed down. But I've noticed with, some guests that I have or just even through television or other media that sometimes there's an interest for the parents to want their children to speak their heritage language, but some parents or grandparents discourage it altogether. And I think that every family dynamic is different and every family is different. And I was wondering if you had any of that in your family or maybe people you grew up with had that experience.
No, I think it was a little bit different in Mauritius because all of us, more or less, had been there for us for like our families had been there for several generations. So there wasn't, because everybody spoke Creole very fluently, Creole was everybody's first language. It wasn't, there wasn't the case of, the kid being bullied at school because he has an accent or, stuff like that,
Okay.
because we all spoke Creole the same way.
Mhm.
So I think that was the main difference where there wasn't this stigma of, oh, you're foreign. We never felt like nobody would ever tell me or anybody else go back where you came from because,
Mm.
we all came from somewhere.
Yeah, right.
Only the dodo was there before us, you know? But I think in the US or in many other places, you get, people being made fun of for their accent. And so they don't want their kids to be made fun of for that accent. So then they discourage the kids from learning. Or apparently in the 80s and 90s, doctors were telling parents that if you teach your kid a second language, it'll confuse them and they'll never be fluent in English. So the parents freaked out and were like, okay, we were not going to teach them anything other than English. So yeah, those are the two things I think.
That makes sense. And now that you're mentioning it, I realize that's such a US centric question that I'm asking, or even concept that I'm thinking of, because it is so prevalent here with so many people coming from every part of the world with every language. And, there's a lot of prejudice here and, not a lot of tolerance for people who have different cultural expressions. So I love hearing that Mauritius is so, mixed up, which I know saying mixed up makes it sound bad, but I mean it in a good way. I love that there's everybody, like you said, everybody comes from somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I think now things are changing. There's a
Mm,
lot more people immigrating to Mauritius from various places. And depending on where they're from, they're either called expats or immigrants,
mhm,
just like anywhere else.
mhm,
And I think there is from the locals, there is a little bit of discrimination in terms of, oh, if you're coming from Bangladesh or, India or, some of these non-white places, you're not treated as nicely as if you're immigrated from France or England or,
mm,
any of
mhm,
these other places. So there's definitely starting to be more of that as more people move to the country and there isn't as much of a common denominator of how long your family's been in the country. But when I was growing up, yes, there were factory workers and kind of low income people who were coming and working in Mauritius, but most of the island, like everywhere you go, people spoke Creole. This is not the case anymore.
mm.
So things are changing.
Oh, okay. I want to know about the Creole because I love a Creole language. I am a
Creoles are the best.
lover. They are. They are. I think Creole languages are alchemy, and I love how much history they hold, and how much they tell us about culture and society and people. So tell me what you love. Tell me what fascinates you. Tell me what you know about this Creole in Mauritius.
Well, to me, Creole in Mauritius is you take French and then you take all the unnecessary fluff and complication and just little variations that nobody cares about. Just remove all of that and you have Creole.
Okay.
It's simple, it's easy to learn, it's easy to pronounce, way more swear words, very colorful. But I do think that it is a very easy language to pick up. So
Mhm,
even people who, as I said, come to Mauritius to work in factories or other, low income jobs, they pick up Creole after a couple of years.
mhm,
So it's really easy to learn. And for a long time, there wasn't a formalized version of Mauritian Creole. It was spoken and we wrote it. We just kind of sounded it out and we each wrote it slightly differently, but we kind of understood each other, you know? I think really it started becoming written more when texting became a thing.
I see. Okay.
I mean, even before that, there were dictionaries of Creole language. Actually, one of my mom's uncles wrote one of the dictionaries,
Exciting.
but I don't think many of us really thought about writing Creole until texting became a thing. And
Mm.
then everybody was texting each other, and French is too much work, man. It's just too much work. We speak French, but it's way too much work.
I agree completely. A lot of work. I'm very curious to know. So now, okay, I have my notebook here and I should have opened it because I need to keep my running thoughts going. But before you said people didn't really think about the written until texting came along. So when we're talking about consuming media, newspapers, magazines, television news, or anything like that, is that in French or in English?
Mostly when I was a kid, it was in French. There was
Mm,
one news broadcast that was in English at a specific time. I'm
mhm,
not even sure if it was every day, but there was like this one thing. And then I think for sometimes they would syndicate BBC or Sky News or one of those, but
mm,
most of the media was in French. There was there were three channels.
Okay.
Mauritius Broadcasting Corporation, channel 1, 2, and 3.
Mhm.
And I think two of those were in Indian languages.
Okay.
So really the only one I understood was the French one. And then radio was in French, newspapers were in French. If you had satellite TV, that was all the French channels.
Mhm.
So yeah, I grew up with mostly French media, but then the educational system was based on the Cambridge, English system. So everything was taught in English.
Okay.
So I had both growing up. That's why I'm like, I don't know which one is my first language because they all kind of
Right.
came together.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
that's so interesting, and it made me think the second part of that question is, were there any places that you were seeing Creole written at all before this standardization happened?
No.
Okay.
Honestly, I think the first time I saw Creole written would have been texting my friends.
Mm,
I mean, maybe every year you would have the song of the year at the end of the
okay.
year. So maybe like there would be some newspaper article about the best, songs or whatever. So the song titles would have been in Creole. So maybe I have seen those, but the pieces would have been written in French,
Right. Okay.
So I don't think I saw any significant amount of Creole written until text. And even that, we were texting and text was limited in characters at the time. So we had
Yeah.
shorthand text for Creole.
Wow.
So I actually do not know the
Mm.
proper spelling of things in Creole
Oh,
because
okay.
I think it's been formalized more now and it's evolved.
Mhm.
And I don't really know how to properly spell things in Creole. It
Right.
it kind of feels like it's always been an informal language to
Mm,
me,
mhm.
and I think now it's probably at the point where it's becoming formal. I have no idea.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense. I have the first ridiculous question of this conversation
I
to
love
ask you.
ridiculous questions.
Okay. So, your news is in French. Your education is in English. At home, for you and your friends, at home, you're speaking Creole. You're out on the street, you're speaking Creole. It's very informal. When you're in school and you're passing a note to your friend on a piece of paper, what language would that be in?
I guess it's been a while since I've been in school now that I think about it, huh? Let's see. I don't know. I feel like I don't know how note passing works in the US, but I
Mm,
feel like when we were passing notes, it wouldn't be like a complete sentence. It would be maybe one word or two.
okay.
So I don't know that it would have mattered.
I remember passing notes in school. And I can say this if my parents are listening now, because I'm not going to get punished. I shouldn't have been passing notes in school, but I was writing tomes to my friends and I was receiving volumes in return. So that's why I'm really curious to think about it because, you, and I'll ask this question later, but if your education is primarily in English, and I guess that's what you're speaking, are you speaking that to one another? Okay, so you're speaking Creole to one another, but your education is in English.
Mhm.
There's a lot going on. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, even though we were taught in English,
Hmm.
so let's say you're in math class, right?
Right.
Taught math in English. The problem sets are in English. You have to answer in English. The teacher comes in, they're teaching us in English, but sometimes they change to French and Creole.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
depends on the teacher. Some teachers, they don't like to speak English, so they're just going to say the English words that they absolutely have to, like, the variable. But then everything else, when they're explaining, instead of saying, if you take this and divide by that, they will say, ou par ça, ou divise par ça. They will use the language that they're most comfortable explaining to us, but we would know enough of the English to know how to write the thing down in English.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it really depended on the teacher. Some teachers were much more comfortable explaining in Creole or French. Others were fine in English. They would do that, but it was kind of a mix.
Mhm. Yeah.
I would be one of the people who spoke the least number of languages in Mauritius.
Really?
So the Chinese people,
Mhm.
my people, we somehow lost a lot of our language by my generation. Even my mom's generation, a lot of them don't speak and definitely don't read
Mhm.
Chinese, right? But many of my friends from Indian descent, they speak at least one, if not two or three Indian languages. So yeah, I was the least, yeah, fluent in other languages. I basically know how to say food in Hakka.
I see. Because that's what you needed it for, or that's how you were communicated with when,
Yeah.
at home. In Creole, we have a lot of French in there. What other languages are there that are making up the Creole conversation?
I think there's several Indian languages in Mauritius, and there's words from those. A little teeny bit of English, probably some African languages too. It's mostly French, a bunch of probably Hindi or Tamil or Telugu or Bhojpuri, probably a few Hakka and Cantonese words here and there, and then some probably East African languages.
Mhm. How fun. That's so, I think that's so much fun. I want to go to Mauritius now.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's get out of here.
I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready to go visit and experience this firsthand. Tell me about, French and you touched on this before when you said that certain people who have come to live in Mauritius, they're treated differently than other people who are living in Mauritius. And that's universal and, for a lot of places, unfortunately. What do you know or remember because you're not living there now? I don't know if we made that clear earlier that you're not currently living there, but what do we know about the stratification of languages and their usages there? Are people seen as more prestigious when they communicate in a certain language over another one?
Absolutely. So even growing up, French or English was considered proper, but nobody used English in daily life, you know. It was almost as if speaking French was formal and speaking Creole was informal.
Mm.
So if you went to, let's say, a restaurant, at least that's the way that I grew up. You know, if you go to a restaurant or a hotel or any place where people don't know you, you would speak French to them
Mm.
as, I don't know, like some form of respect or something. I don't know why. You know, that was ingrained in us. Like you speak French to people that you don't know, like, and Creole was considered informal. So when even with teachers, you were encouraged to speak French to them,
Mm.
but some of them were like, I don't care, just speak Creole. They were like, I don't want to speak French anyway. You can just speak Creole, you
Mhm.
know. But it was definitely taught to us that French is proper and
Right.
Creole is not a real language. It's a dialect. It's not useful. It's not recognized
Mm.
outside of the island. So
Mhm.
we definitely grew up with this mentality of Creole is this thing that is not very valuable that we just use at home. And I think now it must be changing because I remember last time I was there, which was in 2019,
Mhm.
I was very surprised that I would go to restaurants and the servers wouldn't speak Creole
Hmm.
because they were from Bangladesh or India or some other place and they came to Mauritius to work. So I'm going to a Chinese restaurant
Mhm.
and I'm ordering, but I can't order in Creole because the server doesn't speak Creole. And so I think it's changing where there's a lot more people coming in who don't speak Creole at all.
Mhm.
And many of them are not coming from French speaking countries. So English is becoming a lot more common than
Right.
it used to be. when I was a kid, you would never hear English unless you were at a touristy place, like a
Right,
hotel
okay.
or like near the beach.
Mhm.
But now when I go to Mauritius, I hear more people speaking English because a lot of the staff speaks English.
Mm.
So it's been very weird, like going to familiar places and being put in an environment where the language that you associate with that place is no longer the language that that place uses.
Oh, wow. That's a big shift, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was so I was like, "Wow, that is so bizarre."
Is it different? Well, the time that you went back, what was it like being on the street? Did you notice the soundscape changing? Maybe more people were speaking different languages than you were used to hearing.
I think depending on where you went, like, if you went to the city center, like Chinatown in Port Louis, not so much. I think overall, though, there were way more tourists than I remember everywhere. Like, tourists were just everywhere. When I
Wow.
was growing up, there were, certain beaches that were popular that tourists knew about, and
Mhm.
then there were other beaches that it was just locals. And in Mauritian winter, which is still very warm, but for us, it was winter and we wouldn't go to the beach because it was too cold. But, if now that I've lived outside Mauritius, when I go back in winter, I'm like, this is perfect weather to go surfing, you know? But last time I was there in Mauritian winter,
Mhm.
those beaches were full of tourists. And I was like, wow, it's just so many tourists. It's crazy. Like, there's really a lot of tourists going.
Has that been a good thing or a bad thing that you think for locals?
Both,
Mm.
I think, very similar to Hawaii, Mauritius has turned into an economy that relies heavily on tourism. So the fact that we get tourists that are coming to the hotel, putting food on a lot of tables, but also it's encroaching on a lot of beach space. It's
Mm.
making fewer and fewer beaches accessible to locals, and then prices go up. I think Mauritians in general are very proud of their island and of its beauty, and we're always very eager to share it with people. But there's also ecological ramifications of that, right? Like, you have a lot of boat tours and jet skis and whatnot, and then you have dying corals, and then they have conservation efforts that are trying to preserve the corals. But then there's so yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah. I feel so much solidarity with island people. Being a descendant of island people myself, and I was just in the Bahamas, and I feel that same sentiment. Like, I don't wanna tell people about the beach that I like to go to because I don't want them to start going there. But I know how it can be when you are in a society that's so reliant on tourism and so reliant on that, money coming from outside because people do need to work and feed their
Yeah,
families and
exactly.
et cetera. So it's tricky. I just hope that it doesn't do too much irrevocable damage to culture and society and
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure. I think it's something that you can't really tell until it's too late.
Mm, mhm.
Like, it's a long-term thing.
How do you feel that being of Chinese heritage, how did that shape your identity as a Mauritian person?
Yeah, I think growing up, I I would identify as Chinese because we were all Mauritian, but then, Chinese was the type of Mauritian that I was. And my connection to the culture was mostly through food because
Mm.
I've never been to China. On my mom's side, her grandparents came, and on my dad's side, my his parents came to Mauritius. So, it's been a couple generations. Most of the family that came over did not even read on my mom's side, for example. And so we didn't have any media or, any other connection to mainland China. We still have some relatives there, but I didn't know about them until I was much older. So really, to me, Chinese culture was the food, the
Mm.
festivals, like all the celebrations. That's about it. I think there were definitely some cultural things that were passed down. They tried to keep Lunar New Year festivities,
Mhm.
and we had also we called it the Moon Festival, but it's like Mid Autumn Festival, I think the actual name of it.
Mhm.
And there were a few other ones that we celebrated. So there were different dishes that went with that. And then, firecrackers.
Mhm.
And we would go to the pagoda. So the Chinese Mauritians were both Catholic and Buddhist.
Oh, cool. So you'd go to pagoda and then you'd go to church, or you'd go to church and then pagoda? Not maybe not you, but in the
Well, so my mom made us go to church every week, which I
Mhm.
did not enjoy. But then every special occasion, so New Year, Chinese New Year, regular New Year, and then whenever it would be like somebody's who's deceased, like their birthday or something, we would go and do a service there. Yeah, so we would go to the pagoda for like special occasions and do all the stuff that goes with that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then whenever there was like a death in the family, for example,
Mhm.
that there would also be a service at the pagoda. The nuns would come at home and they would sing this very, very depressing songs.
Oh
And then,
gosh.
yeah, and then they would give you this little tape recorder, those like little things. So they would have a little tape in there that has that very depressing song, and you would just play that 24/7 and just be very depressed about what just happened.
Oh no. Oh no.
That is my experience of death.
That song is in what language?
Good question. I have no idea. Probably Hakka,
Okay.
although it could have been Mandarin. I'm not sure.
Okay. When you went to pagoda, the activities that were happening in pagoda, they were in a Chinese language.
Yes. I'm pretty sure it was Hakka because it
Okay.
didn't sound like Mandarin.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was Hakka. Yeah.
And then at church, the service is in what language?
French.
Okay.
Sometimes Creole.
Okay.
Oh, actually, now that the first time I would have seen Creole would be at church because they would project the lyrics to Creole church songs.
Oh.
Now that I'm remembering it. Yeah.
So would there be like a separate Creole service?
No, it just depended on who the priest was.
Okay.
Some priests were very pro Creole language. So
Mhm.
there was this one priest who wrote a ton of Creole church songs, and
Mm.
he became very famous across the island. He would go to masses all over the place,
Mhm.
and his songs became church hits all over the island. Like everybody sang
Wow.
them. So that would have been the first time I saw Creole written, and I remember, sitting there like, oh, that's how you write Creole, huh?
Mm. Do you happen to remember any of the lyrics of any of those songs?
Yeah, it was Jipa qui nous offert pour transformer les cœurs. Feli Oh, Feli Vintoleco no avoiva na huh? Manger nous varisco. Okay, so it means the bread that we offer to transform our hearts, make it into your body to make us stronger.
Huh.
Like, the body of Christ thing,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And then Jiva qui nous offert varisco. So the wine that we offer to transform our hearts, make it into your blood, keep us strong or something
Okay.
along those lines.
Taking a step back, you said that your relationship with Hakka language is so food-based, and you had many cultural celebrations as well. What were you eating?
So mid-autumn festivals, we had mooncakes,
Mm.
but they were not similar. The mooncakes that people know here weren't the ones that we had.
Mm.
So there were a whole bunch of different kinds. They were all way too sweet. but
Mm.
but as a kid, you would
Mhm.
just love it. That was our Halloween. We didn't have Halloween. We had mooncakes.
Right, right.
And they were so good. There were some of them were like covered in sesame seeds. There were sesame paste in a lot of them.
Mm.
Some of them were made of rice flour. In terms of regular food that we had, chow mein, we had in Hakka, we say chow mein.
Mm.
And I think the version that we have in Mauritius has become it's an adapted version
Mm.
that has become like the Mauritian version of fried noodle, like Chinese
Ooh,
fried noodle.
okay.
And it's it's very popular throughout the island. Everybody goes to eat chow mein. Um, and then there's other things like nuc yen, which is a round, almost like a meatball, but it's made with I don't know how you say it, shaya. It looks like a pear. It's squash. The green.
Chayote. That
Yeah,
how you spell it? I don't know how to pronounce it either.
yeah. Whatever that, however you pronounce that thing,
Mhm.
it's kind of a squash. It's delicious. So we would grate that and then use that to with some meat and mushrooms and some type of shrimp and make them into balls, and they're super delicious. So those are also Mauritian inventions because I learned much later on that the original recipe used turnip. But when our people came to Mauritius, there was no turnip. So they were like, oh, what can we use? This looks like close enough. So we'll just use that. And then that became a thing. And now it's a totally Mauritian thing.
Yum.
So for the chow mein, for example, I've never had chow mein at a Hakka restaurant that wasn't Mauritian. But I think when compare it to fried noodles in a Cantonese restaurant, like the chow mein in a Cantonese restaurant, there's different because there's usually it's like a deep fried noodle that's
Mhm,
crispy, and then
mhm.
there's a sauce on top with like vegetables and other things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas for us, there's no sauce. It's pretty dry. It's more
Okay,
like I was gonna say pad thai, but pad thai also has a sauce.
okay.
Yeah, it's more like a stir fry thing. Like it's pretty dry,
Mhm.
so very different style.
Right.
It's not that the noodles aren't crispy. It's just regular noodles.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's different, but I'm not sure. Again, I don't know enough about my own culture to tell you which part is the Mauritian part and which one is the Chinese part.
Right. No, I I understand. What outside of Chinese cuisine in Mauritius, what else are we eating? And I'm really curious, are we a spicy community?
Oh
Are we
yes.
using okay.
Oh yes. Yeah. I mean, my grandmother will tell you everything does not have enough spice. You
Mhm.
know, she needs her chili everywhere in
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
If and I think most Mauritians, if you open their fridge, there will be a jar of chili.
Mm.
Like that's just you need it in the household. And growing up, I was not a fan of it, because the chili there is really hot.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was not a fan of it. But then I hit like 35
Mhm.
and then I started craving chili. I don't know.
So funny you say that because I feel like for me, around the same time, I'm like, this isn't spicy enough. I have like 8 hot sauces in my cabinet, and I was never really super spicy, like into
So
oof.
I think there's a switch that happens around that age.
I am so curious now. It's
We're gonna have to do a survey of the listeners, right? Listeners, if
right.
you're listening to this, go comment on the Instagram post and tell us what age did it hit you that you needed more spice. Oh, that's
This
hilarious.
is so and I love that, and I asked this question because I feel like island communities, we like spice, we like heat, but we like to flavor our food with citrus. We like to flavor our food with dried spices or fresh herbs and spices. So there tends to be a lot of that, but the heat is usually numero uno. It's usually number one when we're flavoring our food. So what have you noticed? Like what dishes are the hot what are the hot dishes that we're eating?
So I think in Mauritius, it was typical to have the hot sauce on the side.
Okay.
So you would add it to it. But a lot of the curries would people would put chili in it, really
Hmm.
hot. I think when there's little kids in the house, they will not put it in because,
Yeah.
little kids. But once you get old enough, they might insist that you do.
Hmm.
But it's interesting. I had curry my entire life. I always assumed that it was Indian,
Mm.
but I went to work at a big corporation in Silicon Valley, and they had a cafeteria, and they were serving African food sometimes.
Mm.
And I was like, this tastes like the curry I have back home.
Yum.
And it was like, wait a second. So this wasn't Indian? Like, I don't know. I don't know. But it was so fascinating to me because I had never had African food. Well, I had African food when I went to South Africa, but I
Mhm.
hadn't had African food, not that many varieties of it, but
Mhm.
I guess there must have been a chef there who knew African cuisine because almost every week we would have African dishes, and I always went to that. That was my go-to. I was like, "Screw salad. Who needs salad? I want the African curry."
Here's another ridiculous question. I think this is the third one, maybe, that I've asked you so
Let's see
far.
how many ridiculous questions we have in one episode. I love it.
Where is the most unusual place that you've run into somebody from Mauritius outside of Mauritius?
Okay. This is the most random.
Mm.
So just to give you context, Mauritius is east of Madagascar, so east of Africa in the Indian Ocean. It's 11,000 miles away from like California. Okay. When I was growing up, my physics teacher in high school was like, if you study hard, maybe you'll get a job at a company like Microsoft. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't even know where Microsoft is. It's
Mhm.
somewhere in this USA, like,
Mhm.
don't even know where that is.
Mhm.
Fast forward 10 years, I landed a job at Apple. And it was like mind blown.
Mm. Mhm.
So I'm taking the shuttle to work and I'm sitting next to this guy. But, shuttle, you're close, right? So he's on his phone and I see him looking at his phone and it's a Mauritian newspaper
Mm.
that he's reading.
Mhm.
I turned to him and I said, "Are you Mauritian?" And he's like, "Are you Mauritian?" This was the most random
Yes.
ever.
Wow.
Like, I happened to sit next to him on the shuttle
Uh-huh.
to work at this company that is 11,000 miles away, right? And he happened to open his phone and read the Mauritian newspaper, and I happened to see it when I was looking out the window because he was
Mm.
sitting on the window seat, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, 'cause I think the paper was called Le Défi. And I
Mm.
thought, well, maybe there's another Le Défi in another French country, right? Like, it's not that unique a word.
Mhm.
So that's why I was like, "Are you Mauritian?" And he was like, "Are you Mauritian?" Wow. So that was very random.
Yeah. So what happened? Did you become work friends? Did you ever see him again?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have him on Facebook and everything. But
That's so bizarre, but that's so cool.
yeah.
I love
We're
stories like that.
Mauritius is a tiny island, right?
Mm.
There's 1.3 million people, I think.
Mhm.
But Mauritians are everywhere. You go anywhere in the world, you will find us. Like the other day, well, not the other day, maybe like a year ago, I had somebody follow me on TikTok, and it was a Mauritian from Kazakhstan
Mm,
or Uzbekistan, one of
mhm.
those. It's like we're
Yeah.
everywhere.
Wow.
We go everywhere.
I love that. I love that. Tell me about your podcast, Nuances. You talk about Asian identity and stories. Tell us about some of the common themes that you explore with your guests, and what are some of your goals with
Yeah.
Nuances?
Well, something that I think will be of interest to this audience is we do talk about languages and whether we speak our Asian language or not. And many, many, many people who are in the Asian diaspora, especially in a Western country,
Mm.
did not learn the Asian language
Mm,
for the reasons we mentioned before, right? Either their parents were made fun of and they didn't want that for their kid, or in the 90s, especially, a lot of doctors were telling parents, don't teach your kid a second language or they'll never be fluent in English. And, the parents were like, well, we want our kids to succeed. So I guess we won't teach them any other language.
yeah.
Um, so a lot of people as adults are trying to learn their language. And a lot of times people in the Asian diaspora feel like they're not Asian enough because they can't speak the language.
Mhm.
And of course, not American enough because we're always seen as a foreigner.
Right.
That's something that really struck me is in Mauritius, I was a minority as a Chinese person. We're 2% of the population,
Mhm.
and we're also a minority as light-skinned people.
Mm,
So most of Mauritius is either of African or South Asian descent. But I never felt like a foreigner.
mm.
You know, people would never come up to me and say, "Go back to China,"
Yeah.
ever. Like that's not even a thing.
Mhm.
But here, that is a thing.
Yeah.
And even if your family's been here, I mean, Chinese people have been in America and still to this day, that you see a Chinese person, people will ask them, "Where are you from?
Mm,
Where are you really from? Where are your grandparents from?" Like I have gotten those questions.
mm.
And to me, at first when I got them, I was not offended by it because, I am from somewhere and I am an immigrant here. Like it didn't really register. But then when I heard other Asian Americans speak about their experience and how even though their family's been here for several generations, like they still get asked, and I'm like, oh, like it's not just a curiosity of learning your culture or whatnot. It's,
Right.
it's like you don't belong here, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
So that is very different, where
Yeah.
you are made to feel like you're not the standard, you're not what an American looks like.
Yeah.
I think in Mauritius, it wasn't like that. I don't know if it's changed,
Mhm.
but I never really had to think about that. you
Mm.
know. And then the other things that we talk about in the podcast is about careers. I try to get people from very different careers and talk about the things that they're doing. I also try to bring in social justice related topics, the queer community, for example, how it's been for the queer Asian community to exist as both queer and Asian. Like Asian spaces can be queerphobic, Asian and queer spaces can be anti-Asian. We address some of those things. One episode that I think people might enjoy is from season 1, where we talked about bilingualism and
Mm.
how it affects your brain.
Mhm.
That was such a fun episode.
Such a good one.
Yeah, I try to vary the topics a lot so that there's a little bit of something for everyone. And also, I love exploring different things. So
Yeah.
it keeps me interested too.
I love that you're amplifying Asian stories and that you're amplifying Asian voices, because I say this as a Black woman, I feel like when you're a creator, you might think to yourself, well, someone's already done this or someone has already talked about this. But I am of the firm belief that when you are Asian, when you're Black, when you're Latino, etc., there's no such thing as a shortage of voices. There's no such thing as a shortage of people having these conversations, because our voices don't get out as far as they should. Our stories don't often get told by people who look like us. And I think it's so powerful that you're doing that and you are sharing stories of people who share your ethnic identity, people who maybe share your heritage, and we don't there's never going to be enough of that as far as I'm concerned, because
Yeah.
we let so many other people tell our stories, and we let so many other people tell our stories through their lens. So we need to tell our stories through our lenses. So I love that you're doing that and that you're creating a space for conversation about the nuances of being Asian and being Asian in America and all the things that that you're talking about on the show. It's so, so, so powerful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Your current series that's talking about queer issues in the Asian community, how did that come about?
Yeah. So several of my queer Asian guests had told me that their parents don't quite understand queerness or don't quite accept it. Sometimes there's religion involved, like, you know, super Catholic or super Christian people. Sometimes I think in Asian history, queerness has been erased. So they're like, queerness is a Western thing.
Mm.
Our culture doesn't have queerness. Like, well, let me tell you about these kings and their favorite lovers. So, one time I came across a TikTok video about this play that was written in China in 1651. And the main characters were these two women who fell in love.
Huh.
And so I'm like, so this play was a hit in China in 1651.
Yeah.
This country was not a country yet,
Mhm.
right? So if that was a hit then, there's got to be more stories out
Mhm.
there. And
Yeah.
I was like, I wonder, if anybody's done something like this and, what stories are out there. I started digging. There was no podcast that focused on queer pre-modern Asia. So there was nothing out there that did specifically that. And I found so many stories.
Wow.
So I was like, I can make a series out of this. And it ended up being a 10-part series. Yeah. And I still didn't cover everything I found.
Oh my goodness. So there's a lot going on in pre-modern Asia when it comes to queerness.
Oh, yeah. Right now I'm on break. I started working on it in September 2023.
Okay.
And the series finished in mid-November this year. So
2024.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I've been working on it for over a year
Mhm.
and I need like some vacation time.
Fair enough.
But but yes, there will be other stories that I will be posting. Not sure when, but it'll be out sometime.
Looking
Yeah.
forward to hearing more of them. For our listeners, please let us know where we can find your podcast, where we can find you on social media, and where we can read about these stories on your Substack.
Awesome. So nuancespod.com is the website. And then on all social media, we are at Nuances Pod. We're on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Thread, YouTube, LinkedIn, sort of X, but not really. And then the Substack is Lazou, Lazou.substack.com.
I want to say thank you for this conversation, and thanks
Oh,
so
thank you
much
so
for
much.
sharing your story and your languages, your history, and your work with all of us. And I've had so much fun as always chatting with you, and we could chat forever.
I know. Thank you
We
so
could.
much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure. I want to ask you one final question. My last question that I ask on every episode is, if you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Mauritian, in Mauritian Creole, or in French to share and to teach us.
Okay. One of my favorites is when something happens and you tell somebody, don't let it get to you.
Mm.
There's an expression, Dilolo bretsons. It's water on, I don't know what bretsons is, but it's a leafy green,
Mm.
but it's the texture of it, like water just slides right over it and just leaves. So when you're saying, it doesn't bother me, it's like, Dilolo bretsons.
I like that.
Yeah, like, whatever, not a big deal.
So I want to learn how to say it. Dilo bread sons.
Dilo,
Dilo
lo,
lo.
bread,
Dilo
dilo, yeah,
dilo. So you're
bread,
saying lo twice?
dilo, there's no R, and
Uh-huh.
then lo is on, and then bread sons.
This should not be this hard for me, but now you have an idea of how difficult it is for me to learn French.
It is hard if you're not used to the French has very, very subtle nuances.
I know.
That's why we need Creoles, because it's fucking complicated, you know? Like I got for that. It's a
Okay.
beautiful language, but
It is. It is. Definitely. I I think I wrote it down phonetically. So can you just say it one more time? So just all the way through so I can see if I missed anything and then I'll repeat after you.
dis-le, long, bread, sons.
Dilo lo bread sons.
Yeah.
And it means
Water on this leaf that just, it just slides off of that leaf. Like, dis-le, lo, bread, sons. Doesn't even bother me. Like,
I'm
doesn't
gonna
bother me.
I'm gonna take that attitude toward learning French in the future. Maybe not let it bother me so much because that's it's a lifelong journey. But thank you for teaching us that, and hopefully our listeners practice along as always. Get a chance to try some new sounds and try some new phrases. So thanks for teaching us that.
You're welcome. Try to remember that in the coming months or weeks or whatever.
Listen, yeah.
When you're
Mm.
gonna go to those family functions and some people are going to get on your nerves, just think,
Mhm.
little bit song.
Mhm.
Little bit songs.
Just like make it your mantra and make it your way of life. Lazou, thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much for having
much.
me.
Before I let you go, in Mauritius, you're having, if you've had a conversation with someone for some time, about an
Mhm.
hour, let's say, you're enjoying the conversation, but now it's time for you both to go your separate ways. What is the best way in Mauritius to say goodbye?
Hmm. Usually it would be allez, moi allez, meaning okay, I'm leaving. And then it would be like allez, moi allez, bye. Like okay, I'm leaving, goodbye.
Mhm.
Or allez, bye bye. Okay, bye. It depends how formal it is, like if
Mm.
it's somebody that you see all the time, like that's what you would say. But if it's maybe somebody you don't see very often, it would be allez à bientôt maybe. So it would be a bit more French and a bit more formal. But people that I am very comfortable with, it would be allez, bye, or allez, moi, allez, bye.
Okay, Lazou, allez, allez, bye. Thank you so much, and I'll be talking to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
New episodes of Speaking Tongues are available every Monday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to like and share episodes with other language lovers like ourselves.